All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome on in. My name is Joan Emerson Bell. I'm an astrologer, tarot reader, mental health counselor, and I like to show up every Monday at 11-ish Mountain Time to break down the astro weather for the week. So, welcome, sit back, relax. I'm going to take you through all the transits that are going down in the celestial spheres this week. Good morning, Jesse Brown. Good morning, Gina Marie. Good morning, Shayla. Um, Before we get all up in the astrology, I just received a notice that my talk proposal was accepted for this year's Astromagia conference, which is a great astral magic conference put together by JD Kelly that occurs online. So I believe that's going to be happening November 1st and 2nd. And I think if I can get it together, I'll be giving a talk this year on the element of water and how that functions elementally, psychologically, astrologically, and some magical practices that folks can do with the element of water. So, yeah, I got my fingers crossed that I have enough time to put something together, but it looks like I'll be giving a talk there. So, check out Astromagia. You can find them on the Instagrams or online. Do your research, check it out. It's a great conference. I know that Michael Ofek and Rory Keyes and some other great astrologers and magicians will be speaking at that. So check it out if you are so inclined. Um, Yeah, I also want to give a big shout out to Mickey Pellerano, who was on this program a couple weeks ago, helping me out. I met Mickey through Astromagia, and his work is fantastic. He does Jyotish astrology, tropical astrology, magic, a bunch of stuff. So check out Mickey Pellerano and his show Time Lord TV, which you can find on YouTube, which is phenomenal. Anyway, that's enough plugs for stuff. Let's jump into the astrology of the week, shall we? So we're looking at this week in space for October. Wow, it's October already. That's wacky. October the 13th, 2025 to October the 19th, 2025. Kicking it all off today, October the 13th, we have Venus, who is entering the sign of their domicile in Libra. So, as Venus enters into Libra today, they move into the sign of their rulership, which means they are out of Virgo, where they were in their fall and kind of having a rough go of things. In Virgo, Venus can feel like nothing is really good enough, that the environment could be a little bit more pleasant. If only like we just tweak this. Oh, it's like almost there, but it's not right. They can get kind of hung up on the details. You know what I'm saying? Like this partnership could check a few more boxes. Oh, I really like this person, but like only if they did this or that or the other thing. You know, that the creative expression could be more meaningful or the sunset could be more vibrant. And it's kind of hard to deal with things when the planet that loves beauty gets hung up on details and kind of nitpicks experiences so that nothing is as good as it should or could be. However, now Venus has moved into Libra, which is nice because they have what is called essential dignity as they enter into the sign of which is their own home. And so Venus in Virgo had no dignity, which I think is interesting to think about. And what does it look like when a planet or a thing lacks dignity? And I kind of looked up the definition of dignity because I think definitions help us to kind of wrap our head around what's going on and what is really meant. And the internet told me the dignity is the quality or state of being worthy, honored, or esteemed. So in Virgo, Venus may have felt that they were in some ways unworthy. They might have felt like they couldn't get the respect or perhaps even lacked self-respect, especially if they were trying to gain respect through aesthetic beauty, which is a Venusian thing, or creative pursuits or relationship dynamics. And those things were perhaps being overanalyzed or were not meeting the exacting standards that Virgo can hold. Now that Venus has moved into Libra, they may be a bit more at ease and have a bit more of an ability to access that feeling of self-worth or self-respect from the pursuits that they're engaged in, the things that feel beautiful or easeful or pleasurable. And this is an interesting question to consider as Venus enters into a sign where they do have dignity. What makes us feel worthy? What makes us feel worthy of receiving love? What makes us feel honored? What helps us to feel esteemed? And ultimately, what helps us to cultivate self-esteem? And what helps to create that sense of dignity in our relationships, in our connections, in our body, in our feeling of being beautiful, in our feeling of the ability to create artistically or energetically, or however you practice the art of creation. And so Libra is looking to bring harmony out of duality. It's about understanding the relationship between the self and other, and understanding the self in the context of relationship. How do we balance our own sense of self-worth and the worth of another person or another, I don't know, sentient being? How do we honor our own dignity in relation to the dignity of another being? Libra is also looking Libra is also looking to try and create situations that are fair and balanced. And I think ideally it's trying to create win-win situations. And we both win when we can come into relationships and situations that honor our own worth and dignity in harmonious and balanced ways and balance them out with the dignity of another being. So Venus is in domicile in Libra, like I said. This is their territory because Venus is all about relationships and how we form and do relationships with peoples and things and places and situations. And Libra and Venus, especially in Libra, is about how these relationships make us feel. Venus is a planet of attraction. It tells us what we want to move towards and what we are kind of like repulsed by and what makes us want to recoil or move away. The feelings of attraction and repulsion teach us what we value and what is right for us and ultimately what isn't. And these help us to form our core values around what we want more of and what we want less of. So we can think about Venus as being this sort of balance point or fulcrum of the scales of Libra. Get my hands of Libra in the shot there. Venus helps us to weigh what we are presented with in terms of that value system and the other Venusian qualities of harmony. And as we are presented with the ever shifting stuff of life, Venus, in their rulership of Libra, tries to bring these things into a harmonious relationship. Venus enjoys a beautiful and harmonious environment, and in Libra has more ability to adjust the lighting or turn on good music or light some incense and create an environment which is conducive to relating. And environments where people feel good, where the senses are delighted, where the vibe is right, there's a greater ease in relating and connecting. And you can just think about what it's like when you are in a nice, harmonious environment and how it feels in your body, how you feel with other people. Makes us sort of like want to open up and enjoy ourselves. Whereas if you're in fluorescent lighting with bad music, and it's cold in there, it kind of makes us contract and recoil a little bit, and we don't have the same type of ease of relating or connecting based on the environmental factors and the terrible lighting. And so Venus enjoys being in nice environments and sensual pleasures. And by creating beautiful and harmonious relation environments, it gives us a greater ability to come into harmonious relationships. And people have a greater ability to connect with each other and work things out and find mutually beneficial solutions to the issues that they are facing. And so we can think about Libran diplomacy comes much easier when we are in well-crafted Venusian environments. And it's the little touches that Venus can add to situations that help to create that sense of ease, which allows us to let our guard down, so we can come into deeper connection with other people and to recognize the balance point where we can create harmonious relationships with each other and again ultimately to create win-win situations. So take a sip of my beverage. Also on Monday, October the 13th, Venus in Libra, having just entered Libra, will oppose Neptune in Aries, and this is going down at 0 degrees and 12 arc minutes. So the very beginning of both Libra and Aries, which are opposing each other. So as soon as Venus moves into Libra, they form an opposition to Neptune, who is on their retrograde journey back into Pisces, and Neptune will re-enter Pisces next week. And so an opposition is a tense aspect, which creates a polarity between the planets involved, and I think also highlights the polarity of the signs. So in this case, ooh, thank you for the nice goblet slash chalice comment. And so, the polarity between Venus and Neptune in this case also highlights the polarity between Aries and Libra. So, this tension between Aries, which is going for self, and Libra, which is trying to, again, find a balanced and harmonious way of doing relationship. And um, so we have this polarizing aspect forming between Venus, who deals with creativity, beauty, relationships, values, and Neptune, who deals with fantasies, dreams, illusions, delusions, and the longing to return to some idealized vision of paradise. And this aspect can kind of get us lost in daydreams or fantasies or ideals. We may find ourselves creating stories about relationships or interpersonal situations which may not be entirely based in reality. Neptune likes to view the world through rose-colored glasses, which may not line up with how things are actually functioning in the real world. And this can create feelings of disappointment and unmet expectations. And we may want to remain conscious of the places where we are drifting into fantasy this week and try and keep at least one foot in reality. Fortunately, Venus has moved into Libra, which is a sign of their domicile, like I said, and which gives them a little bit more agency and power to sort of do their thing. And again, Libra is represented by the symbol of the scales and gives Venus the ability to hold both the fantasy and the reality and to ultimately, hopefully, try and find that balance point between the ideal and our practical concerns of the present moment. So Neptune kind of has the tendency to play the role of either victim, martyr, or savior, redeemer. When Venus is opposing Neptune, these roles can be played out in the arena of relationship. So one may take on the role of the giver who sacrifices everything for the other person. And this can lead to resentment and the sense that one is a martyr, giving up everything to somebody else and never having their own needs met. This type of behavior may also be kind of subtly manipulative, seeking praise or love through the constant act of giving when one isn't even being asked to give in these situations. And it also creates this sort of bond of obligation for the other person instead of creating a reciprocal flow of giving and receiving. And if one is constantly in the giving and caretaking role, they may not be aware of their own needs. And so these needs go unmentioned and unmet until it builds up to a breaking point. And so Neptune can also be the redeemer, the person who is always trying to save their partner or friends, who never allows themselves to receive help and again is never capable of expressing their needs because that would break the spell of the knight in white armor who is constantly riding in to save the day. So we also might find ourselves looking for somebody else to rescue us, thinking that this person or this situation or this relationship will save me. Save me, please. Oh, you'll save me. However, this desire for somebody or something to save us is maybe not the most helpful dynamic to set up in interpersonal situations. And oppositions, excuse me, oppositions tend to create a projection where we project out our desires and ideals onto the world or onto another person. And so in this case, we may project our desire to be saved or rescued or to dissolve into something larger than ourselves. Neptune longs to return to the womb-like state of undifferentiated consciousness, which is a beautiful ideal, but maybe not entirely possible in this physical world. And so with Neptune-Venus contacts like this opposition, whoa, um, excuse me, I just lost my place. Give me 1 second. Pardon the interruption. Man, I was on a roll. Uh, Here we go. So with Neptune Venus contacts, like the opposition, there may be the longing for a relationship or a person to provide this sense of ideal paradise for us. And then when we are not able to attain that, it can bring up feelings of disappointment and distress. Neptune is also dissolving and confusing, and it might dissolve our boundaries, leaving us longing to connect with something or someone at a deeper level, or to try and lose ourselves in a connection, or in the intoxication of love, or in the intoxication of substances. However, the feelings that we experience during this transit may not be entirely accurate. We may find ourselves lost in the fog of love, kind of groping around in the mists, looking for that thing that will fix us or save us or take away the suffering of being human. And it's important to consider that maybe we are all right and complete, and that we don't actually need anything to save us or fix us, even though it sounds really nice, may not be entirely necessary. And lastly, Neptune has a lot to do with imagination, and Venus deals with creativity. And one of the ways of working skillfully with this transit is to engage in a creative practice. Writing poetry, making art, dancing, any of these activities can be helpful ways of utilizing the kind of Neptunian fantasy and channeling it through the creativity of Venus. We can practice allowing ourselves to dream and fantasize, and instead of projecting that idealized vision onto another person who might not have asked for it, or a relationship that is not set up in that way, we can express it through creative processes. And in doing so, we can develop a deeper understanding of the places where we can find the integration point between our romantic fantasy and the actual reality of our relationships, our interpersonal dynamics, or the lives that we find ourselves living in the present moment. So, also, Monday, October the 13th, big day in space. We have Pluto stationing direct at 1 degree and 22 arc minutes of Aquarius. So, Pluto's been retrograde since May the 4th at 3 degrees. They station retrograde at 3 degrees and 49 minutes of Aquarius. So, in 5 months, it is backed up a little over 2 degrees of the zodiac. And one reason that Pluto has such an impact is because it moves so slowly. Mercury transits come and go. You know, this Venus opposing Neptune will be active for a couple of days, and then Venus will move on to the next thing. And we sort of get to the other things that Venus is moving on to later in this report. But Pluto just sort of holds it down. And spends a long time in one place in the zodiac and really churns things up. And so, with Pluto moving retrograde or direct, like the outer planets spend about half the year in retrograde motion. But when they make their station, either direct or retrograde, their energy is amplified. And so, as Pluto stations direct, it kind of grinds down into this degree of the zodiac. And as it shifts direction and like posts up at this one place, really digging in, it really churns things up. And so this will have the biggest impact for people with planets or points in the early degrees of any of the fixed signs. So Pluto is associated with themes of death and rebirth and transformation, as well as issues related to fear and power. It digs down into the depths and excavates the things that we have pushed into the recesses of our psyche, both individually and collectively. And it's kind of interesting that this is occurring on Indigenous Peoples Day in the United States. And We can consider the genocide that preceded the settlement and colonization of the Americas as part of the collective shadow that we are all living. And this legacy of colonization and genocide has not been adequately addressed and remains as part of the collective shadow in the Western world. And Pluto brings things like this to the surface and forces us to look at them to come to terms with the deeper issues that we have tried to turn away from or try and force into the depths so we don't have to come to terms with the discomfort that they bring. But it is the things that we keep secret, either consciously or unconsciously, individually or collectively, that keep us sick as individuals and as nations. Pluto deals with survival fears. And this planet of transformation, as this planet of transformation shifts direction, it can bring up issues related to our survival and primal fears that operate below the surface. Pluto is also the repository for all of our repressed desires and urges. And whenever this planet becomes activated in our charts or in the collective, we are kind of called to turn towards these parts of ourselves that have been shoved into the shadows. These repressed fears and desires can manifest as obsessions or projections onto people or things that we have attached our shadowy, unaddressed urges and fears to. As Pluto becomes amplified this week, it is an opportunity to notice what is arising and to try and transmute some of the material that is coming to the surface. Pluto asks us to address and compost that which has decayed in our lives and in the depths of our psyches. And this is where transformation can occur. The composting process allows for that which has rotted in the depths to be brought to the surface and used to create fertile soil so something new and more enriching can grow. And we can consider what might need to be composted in our own lives and what decayed material is kind of bubbling up to the surface and is seeking to be released so we can create the space to grow something new and perhaps more generative in our lives. So this last week I was in this workshop on Pluto run by Meghna Bhagat at the Living Astrology Conference in Santa Fe, which was an excellent workshop on Pluto and Persephone. And she said something about Pluto that I really, really liked. She compared Pluto to the Hindu god Shiva, who's both the creator and the destroyer. And what Meghna said was that Shiva, like Pluto, destroys only what is destructible, and what is left is what is indestructible. And this is the gift that Pluto brings. They kind of strip away everything that is not essential and not eternal. And this can be really difficult in the moment because it's really painful to have our lives stripped down by a Pluto transit. But it helps us to recognize the most vital and most indestructible elements of our lives and our souls, and to recognize the places of adamantine alignment and vitality. This is incredibly valuable. So as Pluto kind of grinds to a halt in the first degrees of Aquarius, we can notice what gets churned up and what we can let go of. And notice what you might feel like you need to cling to out of survival fears and the obsessive tendencies that fear can produce. And notice what feels unbreakable and eternal within you, because these are the places that Pluto reveals and really grants us access to true power. Let me just check the comments for a second. Mm. Um, and Astrology by Moonlight is saying, may we all use the Pluto transit as a way to purge and release this toxic system of hierarchy. Yeah, and Pluto is also out of bounds and will be out of bounds for a long time, which means it is beyond the sort of reach of the sun. So the kind of order of the solar system, the sun representing a kingly figure. Pluto has sort of moved beyond that. So we can think about this as a shift of power dynamics going beyond the sort of normative structure or hierarchical structure of the solar system or of the systems that we have invented here on spaceship Earth. Okay, moving right along to Tuesday, October the 14th. We have Venus in Libra trine Uranus retrograde in Gemini. This will be occurring at 0 degrees and 52 arc minutes. So now that Venus is in Libra, they're forming a grand air trine with Uranus and Pluto. Air signs are interested in working with duality. They're navigating questions related to the division from the one to the two and how this duality is navigated. Air signs are working to come to terms with the relationship between duality, between the self and other, between the ideal and reality, between the mortal and the divine. And Uranus, planet of liberation and revolution, is moving through Gemini, which deals with binaries, the this and the that. Uranus is revolutionizing the binary structure, and in some ways, hopefully helping to liberate us from the structure of black and white thinking. Venus in Libra is helping us to balance the this and the that the Gemini archetype creates, and the radical new approach to the binary system that Uranus is bringing to the function. So while Gemini is ultimately seeking to find that secret third thing that emerges out of holding the tension of the opposites, Venus in Libra in this trine is asking us, how do we come into relationship with the opposing forces which are being created from this division of the one into the two, in the sort of undifferentiated into the world of duality? How do we relate to this? And how do we relate to that? And how do we balance them? And what might need to shift to create a more harmonious relationship between what we are being asked to hold? Uranus is a planet of freedom, liberation, and revolutionary change. And as they come into a supportive trine to Venus, they create an easy flow between what we find enjoyable and what feels liberating. With a trine, we are being offered the path of least resistance, and we can go where it's easy. So, with Venus in this trine to Uranus, we may desire a little bit more excitement in our lives or in our relationships, and we may do the things that come easiest to us. We might be pushing away in search of something that might provide a new sense of freedom, or we might run towards something because we find it exciting and electric. We might consider what we always do in situations like this and consider if this is the right course of action for right now. Either way, we will probably be looking to shake things up in some area of our life, probably in the sphere of the Venusian qualities of aesthetics, beauty, values, relationship. But what we want to consider is how we are able to hold the dynamic of ourselves with the other, whatever that might be. And how do we find some sense of balance in that dynamic? And ideally a balance that feels generative and in some ways liberating. So this is a good day to try out new things, taking a different route to work, listening to different kinds of music, hanging out with different groups of people, going to places you don't normally go. This is a day for shaking up routine and seeing what types of joy or beauty are available to you when you try something new. And so we want to create the space for the unexpected beauty and spontaneous joy to occur. And as we allow this space for new experiences of beauty or pleasure to enter into our sphere, it provides new information that we can place in our Libran scales and kind of recalibrate our relationship to our environment and to our lives. So staying curious allows for more data that can help inform our sense of harmony, which can in turn help us to find a better balance with the Venusian qualities of beauty and pleasure in our lives, as well as the Uranian desire for liberation, freedom, change, and excitement. So, also, Tuesday, October the 14th, we have Venus in Libra trining Pluto in Aquarius. This is going down at 1 degree and 22 arc minutes of these air signs. So, the same day that Venus perfects their trine, to Uranus, they also form a trine to Pluto and Aquarius. And again, trine is a free flowing aspect, and where Uranus may be bringing in the desire for excitement and revolutionary new information around beauty and attraction and relationship and love and all that good stuff, the trine to Pluto asks for transformation. So again, Pluto deals with issues of death and rebirth as well as power, and it can create some feelings of obsession as the unconscious desires which have been shoved away become activated. And they find their outlet through projection onto the objects of our desire, whether it be people or status or substances or power in the world. And so, with this trine to Pluto, we may feel our emotions kind of heightened and our connections intensified. We may feel our desires heightened as well. And it might be important to try and sort of trace the path of desire back into the underworld and to inquire what might be at the root of them. Perhaps the desire is manifesting as an attachment to something or someone, but it is born out of some unmet need or denied desire, which is unrelated to the thing that we are attaching it to in the present moment. And so as Uranus sort of comes in this grand trine to shake things up and to shake up the desire body, right? This all becomes activated, and some deeper parts of ourselves might be calling out to be heard or met or fed. And we want to see if we can create the space to hear what these parts of us are actually calling for, instead of just feeding it whatever we can easily get our hands on to quiet it down and shush that underworld voice that is calling out to be met. Now, this trine between Venus and Pluto may reveal some of the inner workings of relationships, as well as the power dynamics that are operating under the surface. Again, Venus in Libra has the power to work and bring balance, bring things into a greater sense of balance. Maybe we can work with some of the underlying currents that get revealed during this grand trine and work to bring them into a better sense of harmony instead of having them shoved down into the depths, and that scale kind of tipping like this. Oh, that's the stuff we don't look at. That's the stuff that's not okay. That's the desire that I can't feel. That's the attraction that I can't have. So I'm just going to stay up here where everything is nice and cool, but eventually that scale is going to flip, and those suppressed or repressed desires are going to need to be heard and seen and met and fed in some way. And so this is an opportunity to turn towards some of the deeper emotional urges that might be bubbling up and seeking some type of expression so that they can be integrated into our relationships and into our lives in healthy ways. And if we look at the mythology of Persephone and Pluto, there is this component of Pluto as unloved and alone, living in the depths of the underworld, in the dark, never hanging out with anybody except for his three-headed dog and a bunch of ghosts, while he watches all of the other gods partying and having a good time, and his brothers Zeus and Poseidon getting to have all manner of relationships, and all of the gods interacting with each other. And so there's this part of Pluto which is about wanting and also being unwanted. And how do we balance these parts of ourselves that feel unloved and relegated into the shadows? And considering what they might want and how they might feel unwelcome or not all right. As we push these parts of ourselves away and say, you're not okay here, you can't be here, what does that do to them? And, all of our desires may not be all right to be expressed within the structure of civilized society, but what happens to these parts that are shunned or pushed into the underworld? These parts that might feel shame for wanting what they want and may feel unwanted by our ego or conscious mind. So maybe they're internalizing a story that this is bad or dirty or wrong, or I am bad or dirty or wrong. And so part of the question with Pluto is, how do we honor these desires in a way that also fits within the structure of society and, being able to relate with other people? And our position as social creatures living within a society with other people. So there's a part of Pluto which is incredibly vulnerable. And when we tap into the deep root of desire, it is a really vulnerable thing. And so with this trine to Uranus and Venus, there's this piece of desire wanting to be liberated. But how do we deal with that? And how do we deal with that a sense of vulnerability that emerges when this thing that we has been pushed away, that is needing connection or needing to be seen or needing to be felt, but feels, unacceptable because it's attached to this story of dirty or wrong or bad. So, how do we create situations where we can feel safe enough to hold that desire and have it met in some way? And so, when the Plutonian desire isn't honored, um, you know, when we're not able to be vulnerable and we're not able to tune into that need, it can sort of rot down there and turn into force. Instead of the vulnerability and the opening to this desire, it can be sort of twisted and turn into power over or this sort of forceful action. And this desire can seek to have power over instead of situations where there is a harmonious balance between self and other, where there is shared vulnerability and shared desire. And this is how we can, and as we shift this and as we honor these parts of ourselves, we can create, and as we open to being vulnerable with others as well as ourselves, we can create a sense of shared power with others. And again, we can develop win-win situations that Venus and Libra is so interested in, which moves us to Thursday, October the 16th. We have the Sun in Libra squaring Jupiter in Cancer. So while squares are, and excuse me, this is occurring at 24 degrees and 6 arc minutes of these cardinal signs. And while squares are generally difficult aspects, Jupiter square the sun can be pretty nice, especially if we are able to stay focused and not get lured off course by excess and indulgence. So Jupiter is the greater benefic, and when it contacts the sun, it can provide us with a sense of optimism and faith. It also provides wisdom and can give us a sense of expansion. This can be great if we are kind of disciplined around what we are expanding. However, Jupiter will expand whatever we give them, and with a square to the sun, it might expand our ego or old stories about who we think we are or who we think we're supposed to be. Jupiter has a tendency of kind of heaping things on. So we might find ourselves biting off a little bit more than we can chew, or we might find ourselves in situations where our eyes are much bigger than our stomachs. And in situations like this, we may find ourselves getting a bit overwhelmed by everything that we have said yes to or have chosen to take on, especially as the sun comes in to oppose Chiron the following day, but we'll talk about that in a minute when we get there. But Jupiter's optimism can be great, but under its influence, and especially in hard aspects of the sun, which is our sense of self and ego identity, we might feel like we have a larger capacity than we actually do. And so there can be this optimistic sense that we can handle everything and may get a bit more than we can actually hold. And we might find ourselves needing to unravel or walk back some of the things that we so emphatically said yes to as this week moves on. And as we move into next week, we might realize that actually I can't hold all of these things, or all of these plans are not going to work, or I'm running myself ragged by everything that I've agreed to. And so there can definitely be some leaping before we look vibes with this transit, which might be great for helping us cultivate that sense of faith and trust in the world and the Jupiterian optimism that, I will be supported. But we don't really want to push our luck too far with that. You know what I'm saying? So, with this transit, to kind of gain the most benefit, we want to practice discipline and know our limits. We don't want to get involved in things that are going to require more energy than we actually have to give them. And we want to watch out that we don't extend ourselves beyond our limits or the limits of our resources. On the beneficial side, Jupiter square the sun encourages us to expand our sense of self and our sense of what we believe is possible and what we are capable of. So Jupiter bestows blessings upon us, and they will fill whatever container we bring them. And oftentimes we might not feel worthy to receive the blessings that the world can bestow upon us because of some internalized story about what we deserve or self-worth or whatever. So oftentimes we will show up with a small container, like a little thimbleful, a little cupful, and say, "Oh, Jupiter, please hook it up. Like, I think this is all I deserve." And Jupiter's like, "Yeah, cool, whatever, I don't care," and fills it with ease. And if we were to show up with, say, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, Jupiter would fill it the same way without batting an eye. They're like, yeah, whatever, same thing to me. Like tiny thimble, Olympic-sized swimming pool, whatever. I'm Jupiter. I'm huge. I got this. And so with the Jupiter square the sun, I think that there is this kind of push to expand what we believe ourselves capable of and what we allow ourselves to believe we can have. And my first astrology teacher, Stephen Forrest, said that Jupiter in the chart is the place where we're not asking for enough. And I think that's a really interesting take on that. And it's the place where we're sort of selling ourselves short. And so, with Jupiter squaring the sun, I think we can consider the ways we can allow ourselves to expand and ask for more from the world, from ourselves, from our lives. And this expansion may feel comfortable in some ways, especially in the places where it bumps up against these old stories or core narratives about our worth or what we believe we are allowed to have. This is also a chance to expand our sense of self, who we perceive ourselves to be, and how we allow ourselves to show up in the world. With this transit, we want to be aware of a tendency to excess and to, again, practice restraint where we can. And if we can maintain some discipline in our endeavors this week, we'll be well positioned for better outcomes. And if we get caught up in excess, we may find that the outcomes in the long run are less than desired or may even bend towards the negative. So it may be wise to practice the art of expansion with a healthy level of restraint. Okay, that brings us. Uh, Gina Maria saying, I never overcommit my time. Yeah, neither do I. I totally don't take on more than I can handle ever. But that's the Sagittarian nature of me being like, yeah, sure, yeah, totally. Oh, I can do that. I can do that. I can go to that party. I can do this report. I can do this radio show. I can do this other thing, whatever. Anywho, moving on to our last transit of the week, Friday, October the 17th, we have the Sun in Libra opposing Chiron, the wounded healer, who is retrograde in Aries. This transit going down at 24 degrees and 51 arc minutes of these cardinal signs. So, after the Sun squares Jupiter, it will come into an opposition with Chiron. Chiron deals with core wounds, and coming off the expansive square with Jupiter, Chiron might have a story that we are too much or too big or we are asking for too much. These stories may be connected to past experiences where we were shamed or made to feel bad for allowing ourselves to lean into our full capacity or for being our biggest and most authentic selves. These past wounds can inform the ways in which we show up in the world and the level at which we feel safe enough to participate in life and to be seen by others. Chiron is kind of a pain point, and it shows us the places that require attention and care, and the stories that might need to be reworked in order for us to grow into our full potential. Chiron is also a teacher and the teacher of heroes, and the sun is a pretty heroic guy, you know what I'm saying? And so, with this opposition to Chiron, we can notice these sort of places of difficulty or old stories or pain points and notice, okay, like how is this preventing me from like really stepping into my full potential as the hero of my story? Chiron is the places that if we are able to tend, and the wounds that if we tend them, we are better positioned to assist others who are dealing with similar issues. And we are better able to help other people learn to step into their own heroic nature. And so there is also this interesting mythic relationship between the sun and Chiron. Um, And it's the story of Asclepius, who is the god of healing. And I was just in Greece and had the good fortune of going to the Asclepion, which is the healing temple that was created for Asclepius. And there were many of them around the ancient world, but in Epidavros, where I was the the largest Asclepion or healing temple. And so I've sort of had Asclepius on the brain for a little while, and I'd like to bring in this myth that, Asclepius is not necessarily related to any of the planets specifically. However, I think that the archetype sort of is emerging between this contact between Chiron and the sun because Apollo and Chiron are major players in the story of Asclepius. So if you'll please indulge me, we'll drift into story time. So, Apollo, who is connected with the archetype of the sun, is the father of Asclepius, and Asclepius is the god of healing. So, as the story goes, Apollo developed a crush on a princess, a mortal woman named Coronis. And they got together, they had a good time, and then they separated, and Apollo went back to Olympus. And one day, a crow came to Apollo and told him that Coronis was cheating on him with a mortal. And Apollo flew into a jealous rage and scorched the crow. And previous to this, crows were white, and then in Apollo's jealous rage, he scorches this crow and turns it from white to black forevermore. And so next, Apollo sends his sister Artemis to kill Coronus with her golden arrows. And Artemis happily does that because that's what gods do for each other. And then Apollo sees Coronus on the funeral pyre, and he is racked with guilt and has a complete meltdown and pulls their unborn child from her belly and revives him. And Coronus passes away, and Apollo is left with his child, Asclepius, the little baby Asclepius. However, Apollo doesn't actually want to raise a child, is not really into being a dad, so he hands the baby Asclepius off to Chiron, the wise centaur, to raise. And Chiron teaches Asclepius everything that he knows about healing, and Asclepius becomes a great and masterful healer. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in this next section comes from Edward Tick's book on Asclepius, The Practice of Dream Healing, bringing the ancient Greek mysteries into modern medicine, which is great. So, Asclepius has this divine father, Apollo, and a mortal mother, Coronis. He is the son of the god of reason and light and a mortal woman. So Apollo is sunlight. He is distant and logical and analytical. Apollo is also the god of medicine, but he kind of lacks the compassion and connection to the human experience to deliver it well. Apollo is sort of like the DSM. He is just sort of about diagnosing things, and he doesn't really have the bedside manner to be a healer like Chiron or Asclepius. However, Asclepius has learned about the struggle and pain of incarnation from his mortal mother and his like really tragic birth, which allows him to be a great healer. Because he has this mortal mother, that mortal half of him helps him to be embodied and to be present with the people that he treats and works with. And he is given to Chiron, who is half man and half horse, and Asclepius is half human and half god. And so Chiron teaches him how to connect with these disparate parts of the self and how to sort of channel their gifts. His years of study with the centaur Chiron helped him to integrate his divine and distant analytical nature with the animal intuition and the capacity for human connection, which allows him to hold both the mortal compassion and the analytical reason. He is the balance between divine and human. And with Chiron, Asclepius becomes connected to the earth and learns to sort of grow down into the earth and connect with nature. And so, one of the things that we can ask ourselves is what are the roots that connect us to the earth, that connect us to nature? and that connect us to our nature. And how do you return to your roots? What are the ways that you're able to do that? And, how do you find yourself being called back to your nature? And also, what mentors have helped you return to your nature and to nature in general? And so Chiron carries the wound of abandonment and the wound of the hydropoison tipped arrow that never fully heals. Asclepius carries the wound of Apollo's jealousy, as well as the wound of the divine meeting the human. And these wounds are not easily cured. It is the wound that refuses to heal that really motivates the healer, and the unjust or undeserved wound that we carry, which must be worked out so we don't sit in suffering and resentment. And the story of Asclepius and Chiron reminds us that we are given the wound, but it is our job to work through it so we can help others to heal. Chiron shows us that the animal body and the human body must be reconciled and integrated. Nature and human must be joined together, just like the divine and the mortal must be joined together. And the core wound in humans is the separation from nature. And Chiron reminds us that the path to healing returns us to our connection with nature as well as to our true nature. And so the sun in Libra is sort of holding these two opposites and trying to find a harmony between these parts of ourselves, the human and the animal, the divine and the mortal. And Chiron is helping us to bridge the tension between the human and animal half of our nature and to facilitate healing in the self, in others, and ultimately in the world. And so, with this transit, we might want to consider the meeting of the human and the animal, or the divine and the mortal parts of ourselves. Where do we find the balance between these parts of ourselves? Where is that integration point? Where do these parts meet? Where do we find that balance in our bodies? How do we rest in that balance point? How do we notice when it's shifting out of balance? One last thing to consider is that Asclepius was saved from death and mortality by the immortal hand of his dad, Apollo. He is resurrected by Apollo, or that solar nature, and he is saved from death and flame. And with Pluto stationing direct this week, we might want to think on what we are resurrecting in ourselves and what parts of us are calling out for healing and can be resurrected. What parts might be on the funeral pyre that are calling to be pulled from the flame so that they can be healed and resurrected and made whole? And with that, my friends, I wish you an excellent week in space. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate your attention, and I hope that something that I said helps somebody out there in some way. Um, do I have anything else? Yeah, I don't know. I'm back in my wizard lair, and I'm opening my books for tarot and astrology readings. I also do astrological based coaching. So if anybody is interested in any of those services, you can find me on my website, campwizardcamp.com. You can also hit me up on Instagram at Blind Stallion Space Wizard. And yeah, if you are needing some extra support or just trying to figure out what the fuck is going on, holler at your wizard, and I'll be here to support you, and we can sort it out together. Thank you all so much, and I will see you next week, I think. Same wizard time, same wizard channel. And until then, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and as always, may the force be with you. Bye now.